They tied her to a tree and left her for dead, until the Mafia boss arrived and cut her free. He doesn't take her to a hospital. He takes her home. A phone is taped to her chest, blinking with secrets that could burn his entire empire. She wants out. He says the only safe place is with him. Doors lock, shadows move. Someone inside his house keeps calling her the girl from the trees, and every attack lands like it was scheduled. Then comes the twist. Protection papers that look a lot like marriage, and a ring that may be more than a promise. But the forest isn't done with them, and the man who staged the nightmare wants a final show, back where the ropes first cut her skin. Who set her up, and why is she worth a war? Can the most dangerous man in the city keep her safe without owning her? When the truth snaps tight, which line breaks first, his power or her freedom? The frost-laden air bit at Maeve's skin as consciousness crept back slowly, painfully. Her wrists burned where the ropes had rubbed them raw against the rough cedar bark. Each exhale created ghostly clouds in the pre-dawn darkness, and her legs trembled from standing too long. How many hours had she been here? The sudden sweep of headlights through the trees made her squint. Multiple vehicles, their engines a low rumble in the quiet forest. Her heart hammered against her ribs as black SUVs formed a crescent around her tree, doors opening in perfect sync. Men emerged like shadows, but one stood out, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with contained power. Even in the dim light, his authority was unmistakable. He approached while others held position, their weapons visible but lowered. "Hold position. No one moves without my command." His voice was quiet steel. He drew a knife, and Maeve tensed, but his movements were precise as he cut her bonds. She stumbled forward, and he caught her, wrapping what felt like a cashmere jacket around her shoulders. It carried traces of sandalwood and something distinctly masculine. "I'm Carlo Vitale," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "You're safe now." But Maeve's attention had fixed on something else, the plastic evidence bag taped to her chest. Inside lay a burner phone and a playing card, the Queen of Hearts, its crimson surface almost black in the low light. She watched Carlo's jaw tighten as he spotted it. A sleek town car pulled up, and an older man hurried out with a medical kit. "Dr. Russo," Carlo introduced briefly. "Let him examine you." "No," Maeve managed, her voice hoarse. "I don't know any of you. I need a hospital." She tried to step back, but swayed dangerously. "Ms. Quinn?" Carlo's voice softened fractionally. "This scene was staged. Going to a hospital puts you exactly where they want you. Exposed. Vulnerable." The doctor worked efficiently, checking her pupils, pulse, the abrasions on her wrists. His hands were gentle but clinical. Mild hypothermia, dehydration, some bruising. Nothing life-threatening, but she needs warmth and rest. Maeve watched them all with sharp eyes despite her dizziness. She noted the defensive positions of Carlo's men, the way they scanned the tree line continuously. Professional. Military-trained, probably. The SUV Carlo led her to was armored. She could tell by the weight of the door and thickness of the glass. Inside the vehicle, warmth slowly returned to her limbs. She tracked their route through the winding forest roads, mentally marking turns and landmarks. Carlo watched her in the rearview mirror, his dark eyes missing nothing. "You're already planning escape routes," he observed, no accusation in his tone. "Good instinct. But right now, staying with me is your best chance of survival." The lodge materialized out of the darkness, a sprawling structure of stone and timber that somehow managed to look both luxurious and fortress-like. Carlo's men moved with practiced efficiency, securing the perimeter while he lifted her from the vehicle. Despite her protests that she could walk, his arms were immovable as steel bands around her. "Full sweep," he ordered, voice pitched low but carrying. "I want isolation protocols in place within 10 minutes, no one in or out without direct authorization." Maeve forced herself to stay alert, counting doors and corridors as they moved through the lodge. 3 right turns, 1 left, back stairs behind a panel that looked like simple wainscoting. Her head spun, but she committed every detail to memory. The room he carried her to was warm, with heavy drapes and a massive bed. As he settled her against the pillows, his hand brushed her shoulder, adjusting the blanket. That's when she saw it, a scar across his knuckle, old and white against tanned skin. Such a human mark on hands that otherwise spoke of power and precision. Their eyes met for a moment, and something shifted in the air between them. Carlo stepped back, his expression unreadable. "Rest. There's a bathroom through that door. Fresh clothes in the dresser. Try to sleep. We'll talk more when you're stronger." "Why me?" Maeve asked, fighting to keep her eyes open. What does this Valentin person want? To draw me out, to prove he can reach what I protect. Carlo's voice held controlled fury. Sleep now! You're safe here! But as consciousness faded, Maeve knew better than to believe in safety. She'd learned young that safety was an illusion. One had to create their own. Still, as she drifted off, that scarred knuckle stayed in her mind. One small flaw in his otherwise perfect facade, like a crack in marble. Something real to hold on to in this surreal nightmare she'd woken into. The room fell silent except for the soft crackle of the fireplace and the barely audible movements of armed men patrolling outside. Carlo stood at the window, watching the sun begin to stain the eastern sky. His phone buzzed, updates from his security teams, surveillance reports, background checks running on everyone who had crossed Maeve's path in the last 6 months. He had resources, power, control. He would find who had dared to use her as bait, who had thought to challenge him this way. Behind him, Maeve slept, her breathing finely even. He'd noted her quick mind even through the shock, mapping exits, assessing threats, staying aware despite exhaustion, survival instincts that matched his own. Valentin had chosen his target well, but he'd miscalculated. He didn't understand that by bringing Maeve into Carlo's world, he'd given her the protection of a man who'd spent his life perfecting the art of keeping what was his safe. Morning light filtered through bulletproof glass as the doctor worked methodically on Maeve's injuries. His gloved hands were steady, the antiseptic sharp in the air as he placed precise stitches along her temple. Across the room, Carlo and Bianca stood over a steel medical tray, their attention fixed on the burner phone that had been taped to Maeve's chest. The battery was preserved, Bianca noted, her tailored suit at odds with the clinical setting. They wanted it functional when found. As if summoned by her words, the phone chirped. A message flashed across the screen, followed by a map that made Carlo's jaw tighten. Red lines traced familiar routes, his routes, through remote mountain passes and coastal channels. Supply lines and safe houses he'd spent years securing were laid bare in glowing digital threads. She wasn't random, Carlo said, his voice low and controlled. They used her as a beacon. Bianca's fingers flew across her tablet, coordinating responses. The lodge location is compromised. We need to move. The doctor finished the last stitch on Maeve's wrist. She's stable enough for transport. I'm right here, Maeve cut in, tired of being discussed like cargo. And I'm not going anywhere until someone explains exactly what's happening. Carlo turned to her, his expression grave. Those routes represent millions in legitimate shipping contracts, and some that aren't so legitimate. Someone wanted to prove they could track our movements using you. Using me how? Maeve demanded. Bianca held up the phone. This isn't the only tracker. We need to sweep you for others before we move. The next hour passed in a blur of security protocols. They scanned Maeve for additional devices, checked her clothes and shoes, even ran a metal detector over her hair. Nothing was found, but Carlo wouldn't risk it. By 11, a new convoy was assembled, different vehicles, different routes, different security patterns. Maeve sat in the back of an unmarked SUV, watching the mountain roads unspool behind them. The first time she spotted the gray sedan, 2 cars back, she dismissed it. The second time it appeared after a deliberate detour, her heart rate spiked. 3rd car back, she said quietly. Gray Honda, it stayed with us. Carlo's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, approval flickering in their depths. You see why we're moving you? She did. The threat wasn't theoretical anymore. It had 4 wheels and was following them through traffic. The city estate rose behind high walls in an exclusive neighborhood, old money mixing with new security. Gardens softened the fortress-like architecture, but Maeve noted the cameras hidden in the ornamental trees, the subtle pressure plates beneath manicured lawns. Bianca took charge as soon as they arrived, leading Maeve through a crash course in survival. Panic buttons are here, here, and here, she demonstrated, revealing hidden panels. This sequence opens the safe room. Her manicured nails tapped out a rhythm that Maeve committed to memory. These knocks mean all clear, Bianca continued, rapping sharply. These mean danger. Never open without the correct sequence. They walked the house systematically, escape routes, secure communications, backup generators. Maeve absorbed it all while marking her own observations. The service elevator's blind spot, the window washer's platform schedule, the gap in camera coverage where the east wing met the garage. As sunset painted the windows gold, Maeve retreated to her assigned room. It was beautiful, all cream and silver, with a view of the city lights beginning to twinkle. She sat on the bed, fully dressed, shoes still on, controlling her breathing to mimic sleep. One guard passed every 12 minutes. Cameras swept the hall every 30 seconds, with a 3-second gap between rotations. The ventilation system cycled every hour, masking footsteps for exactly 42 seconds. She filed each detail away, building a mental map of possibilities. In the hallway, Carlo's steps approached. She'd memorized his walk already, purposeful but quiet. He paused outside her door, listening. Maeve kept her breathing deep and even, though her pulse quickened. Long moments passed before his footsteps retreated, leaving her alone with her plans and the growing darkness. The room's luxury felt like silk-wrapped steel, the bed too soft after months of sleeping on her rescue clinic's cot. She missed the simplicity of her life before, the injured animals that needed her, the clean mountain air, the freedom to come and go as she pleased. Now she was caught in a web of power and violence she barely understood, with a man who radiated dangerous competence and his razor-sharp consigliere holding her future in their hands. But they had underestimated her if they thought she'd play the helpless victim. Every protocol Bianca taught, every security measure revealed, was another piece in the puzzle of survival. They were protecting her, yes, but knowledge went both ways. Each detail they shared was a potential key to her freedom if she needed it. The night deepened, city lights glittering like fallen stars beyond her window. Another guard passed, right on schedule. Maeve remained still, counting seconds, mapping patterns, waiting. She'd learned patience in the foster system, learned it again in the wilderness with injured predators. Now, those lessons served her well as she lay in the dark, surrounded by luxury and danger, building her own private map of this gilded cage. In his study, Carlo reviewed security feeds, updated protocols, and tried not to think about the woman upstairs who saw too much and gave away too little. He recognized the calculations behind her quiet compliance. She was surviving, adapting, watching, just as he would in her place. It made her safer, but also more dangerous, because someone who thought like him would never stay caged for long, no matter how gilded the bars. The pre-dawn light hadn't yet touched the windows when Maeve began her careful preparation. She'd timed the guard rotations perfectly. Johnson at 6 a.m., followed by Martinez's slower patrol at 6:15. The linen service arrived like clockwork at 6:30. In her bathroom, she worked quickly and methodically. The thick cream-colored towel rolled tight, secured with hair ties from her EMT kit. She'd learned this trick helping wildlife photographers mask their movements from wary predators, break up the silhouette, create a blind spot. Her heart hammered, but her hands remained steady. Wilderness rescue had taught her that panic was luxury she couldn't afford. She counted breaths like she did when approaching injured bears. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out. The service elevator's soft whir signaled her cue. Maeve slipped into the hallway, towel positioned low to block the camera's view of her feet. The delivery cart's squeaking wheels covered her footsteps as she fell into step behind the worker, just another shadow in the dim morning light. Each turn matched her mental map. Past the kitchen, through the service corridor, timing her movements to the natural rhythm of the house waking up. The side gate stood unguarded, a calculated risk in their security she'd noticed yesterday during Bianca's tour. The morning air hit her face like freedom. Maeve kept her pace steady along the hedge-lined street, resisting the urge to run. Running drew attention. She'd learned that in foster care. Walk like you belong, and people rarely question. The highway's distant hum grew closer, just a few more blocks. Her muscles coiled with anticipation, ready to break into a sprint once she cleared the neighborhood. The patrol car's appearance seemed routine at first, until the officer's voice crackled across his radio. Got eyes on the girl from the trees. Maeve's blood turned to ice. Those words, the exact phrase her kidnapper had whispered while taping the playing card to her chest. The world tilted sideways as 2 black sedans materialized, boxing her in with practiced precision. Men emerged, moving with the fluid grace of predators. She recognized their type from the clearing. Valentin's people, the ones who'd left her tied to that cedar. Their eyes held the same cold calculation. The screech of tires announced Carlo's arrival. His black SUV cut across traffic, door swinging wide as he reached for her. His men moved like extensions of his will, taking positions with lethal efficiency. Behind me, Carlo ordered, positioning himself between Maeve and the threat. The authority in his voice brooked no argument. What followed happened so fast it felt choreographed. Carlo's security team neutralized Valentin's men with brutal precision, while Carlo kept Maeve shielded behind the SUV's armored door. No shots fired. They didn't need them. The efficiency was terrifying. When it was over, Carlo turned to her. His thumb brushed her cheek, wiping away dirt from her escape route. The gesture was surprisingly gentle from hands she'd just watched incapacitate armed men. The only safe place for you is with me. His voice carried absolute conviction. Not a threat, but a fact as immutable as gravity. Maeve's mind raced through scenarios, mapping possibilities like wilderness escape routes. But every path led back to danger, either Carlo's controlled protection or Valentin's theatrical cruelty. The choice crystallized with brutal clarity. "I'll walk on my own," she said, meeting his eyes. Not submission, but strategy. Better to maintain what agency she could. Carlo nodded once, respecting her decision. The drive back to the estate passed in tense silence, broken only by the growing patter of rain against the windows. In the foyer, Maeve's boots left wet prints on the marble floor. She pulled the burner phone from her pocket, she'd kept it as insurance, and handed it to Bianca without prompting. A peace offering of sorts. "Lock down all movements," Carlo instructed his security chief. 48 hours, nothing in or out without direct authorization. Maeve stood straight, clothes damp from the rain but head held high. She'd tried freedom and found it was just another trap, but she'd chosen this cage, this time, made her own decision to walk back through these doors. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows like nature itself was trying to break in. Inside, the estate hummed with increased security protocols. Extra patrols, reinforced checkpoints, heightened surveillance. The gilded cage was becoming a fortress. Bianca's heels clicked purposefully across the marble as she coordinated the lockdown. Carlo remained near Maeve, not touching her, but close enough to intervene if needed. The message was clear. She'd earned neither punishment nor praise for her attempt, just increased vigilance. Water dripped from Maeve's clothes, forming small pools at her feet. She thought of the wildlife clinic, of injured predators pacing their enclosures. Sometimes containment was protection, even if it felt like prison. The trick was knowing the difference. Thunder rolled outside as afternoon shadows lengthened across the foyer. Maeve had walked back into this house under her own power, chosen this protection on her own terms. It wasn't freedom, but maybe it was survival. For now, that would have to be enough. The rain intensified as evening settled over the estate. Inside, Bianca led Maeve through another round of security protocols, their footsteps echoing in the fortified corridors. "Press here and here simultaneously," Bianca demonstrated at the safe room entrance. "The deadbolt engages instantly. Nothing short of explosives will breach it." Maeve's fingers traced the hidden panel, memorizing its location. "How long does the air supply last?" 72 hours minimum. Medical supplies, water, and emergency rations are restocked weekly. Bianca's efficiency was oddly reassuring. She treated Maeve like an asset to be equipped, not a prisoner to be controlled. They moved to a sleek wall panel displaying encrypted messages. "Carlo's priority alerts appear here. If he's compromised, you'll know first." Bianca's tone remained neutral, but the implication was clear. Maeve's safety was now intertwined with Carlo's. The medical wing radio came next. "Guards rotate positions hourly. If one drops, you hit this channel." Bianca demonstrated the frequency. "Response time is under 2 minutes." As night deepened, Carlo maintained his distance in shared spaces, but Maeve noticed his recurring presence. He appeared in doorways when her breathing hitched, lingered in hallways when her steps faltered. Not hovering, but watchful. Sleep proved elusive. At 3 a.m., Maeve found herself on a covered balcony, fighting back memories of rope against skin. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, but her pulse raced like gunfire. "Count of 4, she whispered, trying to ground herself. Her wilderness training kicked in. Categorize sensations, name what you see, find your rhythm. Carlo's presence registered before his voice. "You should be resting. So should you." She didn't turn, kept counting breaths. He moved beside her, close enough to shield her from the mist, but not touching. "What are you counting?" "Heartbeats, sets of 4. It's a technique for panic attacks in the backcountry." She hesitated, then reached for his wrist. "May I?" His pause was barely perceptible before he offered his hand. She placed 2 fingers against his pulse point, demonstrating. 1 set of 4, then reset. It gives your mind something specific to focus on. Carlo allowed the contact longer than necessary, his steady pulse anchoring them both. When he finally withdrew, it felt like permission granted, rather than connection broken. The next day brought subtle shifts in household dynamics. Staff noticed how Carlo's tension eased when Maeve entered a room, how his clipped commands softened in her presence. During a security briefing, his fist unclenched at her quiet suggestion to adjust the patrol rotation. Attraction simmered beneath their careful interactions. Carlo's gaze lingered when she passed, but he never approached without warning. "May I join you?" became his constant refrain, at meals, in the library, passing in halls. The choice was always hers. Maeve found herself watching him too, the precise way he folded his cuffs, how he counted steps between security checkpoints, the rare half-smile when she anticipated his needs. Power radiated from him like heat, but he wielded it with unexpected restraint. The household adapted to their orbital dance. Guards straightened when Maeve approached, not from fear but respect. She'd earned it by choosing to return. Bianca included her in operational discussions, valuing her practical insights about terrain and tracking. As night fell again, the rain finally cleared. Stars emerged above the estate's fortified walls. Maeve curled on the living room couch, a rare moment of peace as an old movie played quietly. Carlo appeared in the doorway, jacket removed, shoulder holster visible against his crisp shirt. His stance was alert despite the late hour, forever vigilant, but his expression softened as he watched her fighting sleep. The movie's blue light flickered across Maeve's face as exhaustion won. Her breathing deepened, body relaxing into genuine rest for the first time since the clearing. She was dimly aware of Carlo crossing the room, felt the whisper of soft wool as he draped a blanket over her. Maeve kept her eyes closed, maintaining the pretense of sleep. But she made a choice in that moment, to accept this temporary peace, to trust the protection he offered. Not forever, perhaps, but for now. Carlo resumed his post in the doorway, a shadow standing guard while she rested. The estate settled around them, security systems humming, guards making their rounds. Outside, the night air cleared of rain carried distant sounds of the city. Inside, in this quiet room, an unspoken agreement held. She would stay of her own will, and he would make it worth her choice. The morning sun had barely cleared the trees when the explosion rocked the estate. One moment, Maeve was crossing the foyer with a coffee mug. The next, a thunderous blast shattered every window facing the drive. The mug slipped from her grip as the force knocked her sideways, ceramic shards mixing with falling glass. "Down!" Carlo's voice cut through the chaos. His men moved with practiced precision, two of them sweeping her legs out from under her while Carlo himself appeared like a shadow, dragging her behind a massive stone pillar. His body caged hers completely, one arm braced above her head as secondary explosions popped from the burning car. The alarms wailed at a pitch that made her teeth ache. Through gaps in Carlo's protective stance, she glimpsed flames eating through the manicured hedges, thick black smoke rolling across the pristine lawn. The acrid smell of burning rubber and fuel filled her lungs. "Status!" Carlo barked into his radio, his free hand steady on his weapon. Reports crackled back. No casualties, perimeter holding, fire suppression engaging. His muscles remained coiled tight around her, ready to move at the slightest threat. "Stay here," he ordered, voice low and lethal. "Do not move until I clear it." His eyes searched hers, for understanding, waiting for her nod before he shifted away. The next hours blurred into a grim choreography of investigation and revenge. Carlo worked the problem with cold precision, his men collecting fragments while he pieced together the bomber's trail through burner phone records and traffic camera footage. Maeve watched from behind newly erected barriers as forensics teams tagged evidence and security teams reinforced the walls. By late afternoon, Carlo had his target. He left without explanation, his expression carved from stone. When he returned hours later, his knuckles were split and bloody, suit jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled to reveal crimson spatters. He went straight to his private bathroom, and Maeve heard water running for long minutes as he scrubbed away the evidence of whatever justice he'd delivered. Only after he was clean, hands pink from scalding water, did he approach her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice carefully modulated. When she shook her head, he exhaled slowly. "The threat is eliminated, but we're adjusting security." That's when she met Enzo Ricci, newly assigned to her outer detail. He was younger than most of Carlo's men, with sharp features and watchful eyes. His smile seemed tight, professional, as he nodded acknowledgement of his post. "I'll shadow Miss Quinn's movements outside the inner rooms," Enzo explained, his stance military precise. Additional measures include upgraded motion sensors and thermal imaging at all entry points. Maeve studied him, noting how his gaze flickered between her and Carlo, measuring their dynamic. There was something calculating in his assessment that made her uneasy, though she couldn't pinpoint why. As evening settled, the estate took on an altered atmosphere. Generators hummed steadily, powering temporary lights while the electrical system underwent repair. The air held competing scents, smoke from the explosion, bleach from the cleanup, and under it all, the metallic tang of fear. Maeve found herself drawn to an upstairs window, one of the few with intact glass. She pressed her palm against the cool pane, counting the unbroken windows across the facade like tallying survivors. Each whole section represented a piece of her increasingly confined world that hadn't shattered. Below, Carlo paced the drive, radio in hand as he restructured the watch schedule. His voice carried faintly through the glass. Precise coordinates, overlapping patrol patterns, contingency protocols. He would work through the night, she knew, rebuilding their fortress. The gravity of her situation settled deeper with each passing hour. The violence had come because of her, yet Carlo's response had been to wrap her in even more layers of protection. His brutality in eliminating threats contrasted sharply with his careful handling of her afterward, as if he could compartmentalize his nature into separate boxes: ruthless enforcer and gentle guardian. Security teams moved with renewed urgency across the grounds, installing additional cameras and sensors. The estate was transforming into an even more sophisticated cage, albeit one designed to keep dangers out rather than keep her in. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had chosen to stay, and now leaving seemed impossible anyway. As darkness fell, the temporary lights cast harsh shadows across the scarred driveway. Cleanup crews had removed the burnt car and debris, but scorch marks remained on the stone, like dark memories. The damaged hedges had been cut away, leaving gaps in the once perfect green barrier. From her window vigil, Maeve watched Carlo direct the installation of new security measures. Even at this distance, she could read the tension in his shoulders, the deadly focus in each gesture. He was rebuilding their defenses with the same methodical precision he'd used to dismantle their enemies. The night air carried the sounds of drills and radios, of men calling coordinates and checking equipment. Enzo moved through the organized chaos with fluid efficiency, learning the new protocols while keeping one eye always on her window. His presence was meant to be reassuring, another layer of protection, but something about his careful attention made her skin prickle. The attack had changed more than just the estate's defenses. It had shifted something fundamental in the air between her and Carlo, in the way his men watched them both. The violence had drawn a stark line between the world outside and their carefully maintained sanctuary, making it clear there could be no easy return to normal life. As generators continued their steady drone and Carlo recalibrated security into the small hours, Maeve remained at her window post. She counted intact panes like heartbeats, like breaths, like the steps between her and freedom, measuring what remained of her world after the morning's shattering. The afternoon sun slanted through the study windows as Maeve scrolled through the burner phone's cloud storage. Her fingers trembled slightly over the screen, each swipe revealing another intrusion into her past months. The credentials Bianca had extracted from the phone's forensics opened a digital vault of surveillance that made her stomach clench. "These go back almost a year," she said, her voice tight. The photos showed her life in crisp detail, treating injured hawks at the wildlife center, running triage scenarios during EMT training, even grocery shopping on quiet Sunday mornings. Each image carried a timestamp and GPS tag, marking her movements like pins in a predator's map. Bianca leaned over her shoulder, expression grim. "They were building a pattern, learning your routines, professional work." A particular photo made Maeve's breath catch. It showed her treating what she'd thought was a lost hiker last winter, an older man with silver-streaked hair and weathered features. She remembered him clearly now, the way he'd appeared on a remote trail with a supposedly twisted ankle, how he'd insisted on refusing hospital transport once she'd wrapped it. "I know him," she said, zooming in on the man's face. "This is Salvatore Greco." Carlo's voice cut through the room like steel. He'd materialized in the doorway, his presence immediately filling the space. "One of our old guard. He was managing cleanup that day, keeping local law enforcement diverted from a defensive operation." The pieces clicked into horrible place. That day, that seemingly routine rescue call had been carefully orchestrated. She'd been an unwitting pawn in their game even then. "Bring him," Carlo commanded to someone in the hall. His jaw was set in a way that promised violence, but when he looked at Maeve, his expression softened fractionally. "You deserve answers." Minutes later, Salvatore Greco stood in Carlo's office, flanked by guards. Age had added more silver to his hair since the photo, but his eyes were sharp as ever as they darted between Carlo and Maeve. "Explain," Carlo ordered, his voice deceptively quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded storms. Salvatore's shoulders straightened. The operation that day required absolute discretion. Local police were getting too close to a defensive position. I needed a credible reason to keep them focused elsewhere. "So you used me," Maeve said, her voice steady, despite the anger building in her chest. "Pretended to need help. Your foster father owed debts to certain interests. The arrangement seemed mutually beneficial at the time. Keep the police occupied, settle some of his obligations." The air in the room grew thick with tension. Carlo's hands, resting on his desk, curled into fists. And Valentine? He discovered the connection recently, started digging into old files, found the overlap, used it to— Salvatore swallowed hard. To identify her as a pressure point. The metallic taste of imminent violence filled the air. Carlo moved with lethal grace around his desk, every muscle coiled for strike. You brought her into this. Your actions put her in Valentine's crosshairs. Carlo? Maeve's voice cut through his fury. She stood, placing herself between them. We need him alive. He knows Valentine's old networks, his methods. That's more valuable than revenge right now. For a long moment, Carlo remained perfectly still, death held in check by her words alone. Then, with visible effort, he stepped back. Take him to the secure wing, he ordered the guards. Full lockdown, no outside contact. As Salvatore was led away, Maeve felt the weight of months of surveillance pressing down on her. Every casual moment, every routine shift had been watched and recorded, building toward this crisis. The day bled into evening, tension lingering in the air like smoke. Maeve found herself on the balcony, the burner phone heavy in her hand as she scrolled through more photos. Her life, carefully documented by unseen observers. Each image stoked a deeper fury, not just at being watched, but at how long this game had been in motion around her. Through the glass doors behind her, she felt Carlo's presence before she saw his reflection. He stood just inside, watching her with an intensity that spoke of internal struggle. The weapon in him warred with something else, something that emerged only in her presence. The phone screen showed another photo, Maeve bandaging a rescued fox kit, totally unaware of the camera capturing her gentle handling of the frightened animal. The contrast between that moment of care and the violence surrounding her now felt stark enough to crack glass. Carlo's reflection remained still, as if he were mapping out all possible futures from this moment. His customary mask of control showed hairline fractures, uncertainty in the set of his shoulders, something almost vulnerable in how he watched her. The night air carried the scent of late summer flowers from the garden below, incongruously sweet against the bitter knowledge of betrayal. Security lights swept the grounds in steady patterns, and somewhere distant, guards made their rounds. In her hand, the phone continued to display evidence of how thoroughly her privacy had been violated, how completely her life had been mapped by enemies. She felt Carlo's struggle through the glass, his instinct to eliminate threats warring with her earlier request for restraint. For all his power, all his capacity for violence, he had stayed his hand at her word. The realization carried its own kind of weight. The burner phone's gallery continued its damning testimony. Maeve at coffee shops, at training sessions, at animal releases, each image a thread in the web that had finally drawn tight around her. But her anger wasn't helpless anymore. It had purpose now, direction. She would use it to rewrite this story on her own terms. Behind the glass, Carlo watched her reflection as if she were a cipher he was trying to decode, a puzzle that challenged his usual solutions of force and control. For her, he was learning to be something other than the weapon his life had forged him into. The question of what that might be hung in the air between them, unanswered but insistent. The estate transformed as night fell. Security panels blinked red, blackout shades whispered down like a final curtain, and emergency protocols activated with practiced precision. In the command center, Bianca's tablet displayed thermal signatures approaching the outer perimeter, a hit team moving with coordinated intent. Northwest quadrant shows movement, she reported, her voice clipped. Multiple heat signatures, professional formation. Carlo's jaw tightened as he studied the feed. Full lockdown, no lights, no movement without clearance. His eyes found Maeve's across the room. My study, now! They moved through darkened halls, past guards taking defensive positions. The study door closed behind them with a heavy click, sealing them in a space that felt removed from the tension coiling through the rest of the house. Moonlight filtered through reinforced windows, casting silver shadows across Carlo's collection of rare books and antique weapons. Maeve's pulse thundered in her ears, fear and adrenaline mixing with something else, an electric awareness of Carlo's proximity in the confined space. He maintained a careful distance, letting her set the terms of their shelter. How long? She asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Hours, maybe, until the threat's neutralized. He moved to the desk, checking feeds on a hidden monitor. You're safe here. Safe. The word tasted different now. She watched him. The precise way he moved, the control he wore like armor. What if I want more than safe? Carlo went still, his attention shifting entirely to her. Maeve. My terms, she said firmly. My pace, my control. She stepped closer, close enough to see the rapid beat of his pulse at his throat. "And I need a safe word. Anything you need." His voice was rough with restraint. "Name it." "Wildflower." She chose it deliberately, a reminder of her world before all this. "If I say it, everything stops." "Wildflower," he repeated, like he was committing it to memory. "I swear it." The first touch was electric. Her hand on his chest, feeling his heart race beneath expensive fabric. He remained perfectly still, letting her explore. When she reached for his tie, his breath caught, but he didn't move. "You can touch me," she permitted, and his hands came up slowly, telegraphing every movement as they traced her arms. The kiss, when it came, was entirely her initiative. She rose on her toes, pressed her lips to his, and felt the tremor that ran through his powerful frame. He kissed her back with exquisite care, passion held in check by iron control. Somewhere in the estate, guards moved in practice patterns. Outside, a hit team probed for weaknesses they wouldn't find, but in the study, time stretched and compressed around them as clothes fell away piece by piece, each removal a conscious choice. Carlo's body told its own story, scars mapping years of violence, muscle built for power, but his touch was reverent, his focus absolute as he followed her lead. When she pushed him onto the leather couch, he went willingly. When she straddled him, his hands settled on her hips with careful restraint. "Tell me what you need," he murmured against her throat. "You," she answered. "Just you." Their coupling was slow, deliberate, pleasure building in waves as she set the rhythm. His control never wavered, even when she felt him trembling beneath her. Every boundary she set, he treated like a sacred trust. The night deepened around them. Security feeds showed the hit team retreating, unable to breach the outer defenses. But they barely noticed, lost in each other as fear transformed into something else entirely. After, they lay tangled together on the couch, her head on his chest, her fingers tracing an old bullet scar near his heart. His breathing had grown deep and even, real sleep, not the vigilant doze she'd observed before. She watched his face in the moonlight, seeing how youth returned when the weight of command fell away. Through the night, Bianca coordinated the guard rotation with quiet efficiency. Boots moved on carpet, radios crackled with coded updates. But none approached the study door. They protected this pocket of peace with the same dedication they gave to any security objective. Dawn arrived with the soft hum of the city waking. They dressed slowly, trading gentle touches that held none of the previous night's urgency. When Carlo brought coffee to the balcony, Maeve accepted the cup with a smile that spoke volumes. They stood together watching the sunrise paint the sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold. Steam rose from their cups, and below, early traffic began to fill the streets. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. What had happened between them wasn't something that could be undone or forgotten. The morning air carried the scent of brewing coffee from the kitchen, of dew on the garden roses, of life continuing despite all that had changed. Carlo's free hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with casual intimacy. The gesture felt both foreign and inevitable, like the first word of a language they were learning together. Around them, the estate resumed its rhythm. Guards changed shifts, kitchen staff prepared breakfast, and Bianca's heels clicked efficiently down hallways as she reviewed the night's reports. But on the balcony, time moved differently. Each sip of coffee, each shared glance, each brush of fingers carried the weight of recognition. This was a turning point, a threshold crossed. The city hummed below them, oblivious to the private revolution that had occurred in the night. Traffic lights changed, delivery trucks made their rounds, and people hurried to their morning appointments. Yet in this elevated sanctuary, Maeve and Carlo existed in their own pocket of transformed reality, where power had yielded to tenderness and control had given way to trust. The morning sunlight had barely warmed the study's leather chairs when Bianca strode in, manila folder in hand and tension in her shoulders. Carlo looked up from his laptop, and Maeve paused with her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "We have a problem," Bianca said, spreading documents across the desk. Judge Martinez signed a subpoena. They're trying to force Maeve into open court for questioning about the night in the woods. Maeve's stomach clenched. "That puts me in public. Exposed." "Exactly?" Bianca's fingers drummed once on the papers. "Martinez is in Valentine's pocket. He'll make sure the hearing drags out, keeping you visible and vulnerable." Carlo's jaw tightened. "Options. 1. Bianca met Maeve's eyes directly. Spousal privilege. As Carlo's wife, you couldn't be compelled to testify. Your residential address would be sealed. The coffee turned bitter in Maeve's mouth. Marriage of convenience. How romantic. It's a legal shield, Bianca said, nothing more. Maeve paced to the window, watching sunlight glint off parked cars below. Her mind raced through scenarios: public exposure versus private protection, independence versus security. I need terms, she said finally, turning back to face them. Written ones. Carlo nodded once. Name them. My own bank account, untouchable. Veto power over charitable spending. I won't be a trophy wife rubber stamping donations. She took a breath. And explicit right to leave once this war with Valentin ends. Done. Carlo didn't even glance at the papers. You haven't read them. I trust your conditions more than my pride. His dark eyes held hers. Write what you need. Bianca produced a laptop, and Maeve spent the next hour crafting addenda while the lawyer refined the language. Carlo signed each page without hesitation, his pen scratching with quiet finality. By early afternoon, they stood in a judge's chambers downtown. The room felt airless, all dark wood and stale authority. The judge, not Martinez, droned through the civil ceremony while Maeve's pulse thundered in her ears. When they exchanged rings, Carlo's hands were steady, but his eyes blazed with something beyond mere legal convenience. The metal was warm from his pocket, sliding cool onto her finger. Their gazes locked and held, the air between them charged with unspoken weight. 2 signatures, 1 stamp, marriage complete. They left separately, but in the same convoy, maintaining appearance of normalcy, even as whispers began spreading through the city's underground channels. Carlo's car led, Maeve's followed, with guard vehicles bracketing both. Through the tinted windows, she watched the city scroll past, the same streets but viewed through a lens forever altered. Back at the estate, the rings caught late afternoon light as they moved through familiar rooms that somehow felt different. Staff kept their eyes down, but Maeve felt the ripple of awareness. She was no longer just a protected guest. She was the boss's wife. Dinner was quiet, almost normal, except for the new weight on her left hand. They discussed security rotations and maintenance schedules like any other evening, but undertones hummed beneath every word. When night fell, Maeve stood at her bedroom threshold, ring glinting in the dim hallway light. The door faced Carlo's across the landing, both open in silent invitation. But she turned instead to the adjoining sitting room, settling onto the plush couch with a blanket. Not rejection. She needed space to process how her world had shifted in mere hours. From kidnapped EMT to Mafia wife in less than 2 weeks. The title sat strangely, like clothes that didn't quite fit. Through the wall, she heard Carlo's door close without the snick of a lock. Neither of them would sleep much tonight, both aware of the other's proximity, both respecting the distance needed to adjust to their new reality. Maeve traced the ring's smooth edges, remembering the voltage in Carlo's eyes as he'd slipped it on her finger. A marriage of convenience shouldn't feel so charged, so weighted with unspoken meaning. She'd seen his face when she listed her conditions, not offense at her demands, but approval of her strength. The sitting room held scattered evidence of her temporary residence, medical texts she'd been studying before the kidnapping, a half-empty water glass. Her phone charger snaked across an end table. Now it wasn't temporary. This was home, at least until Valentin was dealt with. She could hear the night shift guards making their rounds, radios crackling quietly. The estate's rhythms continued unchanged while everything else had transformed. Somewhere nearby, Carlo was likely still awake, processing his own thoughts about their tactical marriage. Except it didn't feel entirely tactical, despite the legal necessity that spawned it. There was something else growing between them, something that made simple convenience feel like an inadequate description. The moon cast silver light through gauzy curtains as Maeve curled deeper into the couch. Her ring caught the glow, throwing tiny reflections onto the ceiling. Such a small thing to reshape an entire life. But she'd chosen this. Chosen him, really, even if neither of them were ready to name it that way. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The marriage would need to be sold as genuine to the outside world. They'd need to navigate public appearances, shared spaces, the delicate dance of maintaining boundaries while presenting unity. But for tonight, she let herself exist in this liminal space between what was and what would be. The couch was comfortable, the blanket was warm, and despite everything, she felt oddly at peace with her choice. Not because it was perfect, but because it was hers, made with clear eyes and on her own terms. Through the wall, she heard Carlo shift in his room, equally restless. They were separated by plaster and paint and choice, yet connected by ink-fresh signatures and bands of precious metal. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. Sometimes Maeve thought, that was worth more. 2 days settled into a militarized rhythm. Every hour scripted, every movement tracked, the estate transformed into a precise machine of survival. Breakfast happened under the watchful eyes of armed men, steaming coffee served in expensive cups while guards rotated shifts outside. The morning sun painted shadows across detailed patrol logs projected on the wall panel, timestamps marking each sweep of the grounds. At precisely 10 each morning, they gathered in Carlo's study. Bianca delivered intelligence in her crisp attorney's tone while Carlo stood at the window, his reflection a dark shape against the glass. Maeve absorbed the patterns of their world, which guards took which posts, how the security grid pulsed through day and night, where the cameras overlapped and where they didn't. She counted medications in the medical wing twice daily, logging every vial and bandage. The routine grounded her, gave purpose to hours that could have drowned in fear. Carlo watched her work sometimes, his presence a shadow in the doorway that should have felt intrusive but didn't. But beneath the ordered surface, something nagged at her awareness. A pattern emerged in the incident reports Bianca compiled each evening. Every breach, every attempted infiltration aligned with Enzo's command of the Outer Watch. 3 attempts, 3 nights when he controlled the perimeter. The coincidence sat like ice in her stomach. She studied him during shift changes, noting how his eyes followed her with calculation rather than duty, the way he smiled too easily, spoke too smoothly, how he used phrases that echoed her captors, little verbal tells that clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. The medical supply corridor provided her chance, sterile and bright, with cameras she knew intimately from restocking runs. She made sure her medkit was open, the built-in training camera active but hidden among gauze and vials. "Need any help with that inventory?" Enzo's voice carried false concern as he appeared in the doorway. Maeve kept her movements steady, professional. "Just finishing up, though I could use an extra set of hands organizing these new supplies." He stepped closer, that artificial smile in place. "Anything for our tree girl." The phrase hit like a slap. The same words the corrupt officer had used, words only someone involved in her kidnapping would know. She forced herself to continue sorting supplies, letting the camera capture every moment. "That's an interesting way to put it," she said carefully, her thumb pressing the clip transmission button. "Where did you hear that phrase?" "Around." His smile slipped slightly. "You know how talk spreads." "Actually, I don't." She met his gaze directly. "That's not the kind of detail that just spreads." The air changed, tension crackling, as Enzo realized his mistake. His hand twitched toward his weapon, but Carlo was already there, materializing from the blind corner like violence given form. The takedown was swift and brutally efficient. Carlo moved with controlled fury, but when Maeve said, "We need him conscious for proof," he adjusted his grip, choosing restraint over revenge. Enzo's face met the floor, arms twisted behind his back as Carlo secured him. Bianca appeared with the security team, her tablet displaying the damning video clip. Enzo was hauled to his feet, blood trickling from his nose, defiance crumbling into fear as he faced Carlo's cold stare. "The holding room!" Carlo ordered, his voice arctic. "Full surveillance, no privileges. We do this properly." Maeve watched them drag Enzo away, her hands surprisingly steady as she repacked the medical kit that had become an impromptu trap. The betrayal stung, but the evidence was clean. His own words caught on camera, his own arrogance providing the proof they needed. The estate seemed to hold its breath, shock rippling through the ranks as word spread. Guards doubled their posts, faces grim with the knowledge that one of their own had sold them out. Trust, already a scarce commodity, grew even rarer. In the holding room, Enzo sat cuffed to a steel chair while Bianca's team began their work. Maeve stood in the observation room, Carlo a solid presence beside her as the questioning started. Her medical kit rested at her feet, its hidden camera having served its purpose. The house itself seemed to exhale a brittle, fearful breath, the kind that comes after narrowly avoiding disaster. Staff moved quietly through the halls, security protocols tightened like a noose, and Maeve's hands remained steady as she gripped the kit that had helped expose their traitor. She caught Carlo watching her, something like pride mixing with his anger. She'd played her part perfectly, used her position to trap Enzo without tipping their hand. The medical wing's cameras would have caught everything, but her kit's hidden lens provided intimate proof of his betrayal. Guards posted at every intersection now moved with heightened vigilance, their faith in their own ranks shaken. Bianca coordinated with her intelligence team, tracing Enzo's communications, mapping his connections to Valentine's organization. The holding room hummed with contained tension as Enzo's interrogation continued. Each question peeled back layers of deception, revealing the extent of his treachery. How long he'd been feeding information, which routes he'd exposed, what intel he'd passed to their enemies. Maeve's kit sat silent now, its secret camera dark, but its impact rippled through the estate like stones thrown in still water. She'd turned medical supplies into a trap, transformed healing tools into weapons of truth. The irony wasn't lost on her. How her role as a healer had helped expose the infection in their ranks. The house would recover, adapt, grow stronger from this breach. But for now, they all breathed that brittle, fearful breath, processing the betrayal while Enzo sat secured in the holding room, his lies unraveling thread by thread. The morning light filtered through bulletproof glass as Maeve scrolled through her phone, notifications flooding in. Her stomach dropped as she saw the video. Crystal clear footage showing her speaking with Valentine at a cafe, planning something in hushed tones. Her own face, her mannerisms, but a moment that had never happened. Deep fake, Bianca confirmed, her tablet displaying frame-by-frame analysis. Sophisticated work. They used footage from your EMT training videos to build it. Carlo stood by the window, his reflection hard as stone. It changes nothing. But it did. Maeve felt the shift immediately. Guards who'd grown comfortable around her now watched with wary eyes. Whispers followed her through corridors. Even those who doubted the video's authenticity couldn't help wondering, what if? Show them the timestamp analysis, Carlo ordered Bianca, his voice carrying through the great room where several of his men gathered. Show them the digital artifacts. But doubt, once seated, grew like weeds through concrete. Maeve caught fragments of conversations. Meeting him before, and could have been working with them all along. By mid-morning, Salvatore's full confession reached her desk, pages of old sins laid bare. Her hands trembled as she read how he'd strong-armed her foster father years ago, using a medical debt to force compliance during a territory dispute. The debt grew, passed through shadows, until Valentine found it. The perfect lever to apply pressure through an innocent connection. I was already part of this, she whispered, papers scattered across her lap. Before the tree, before any of it. Carlo moved to touch her shoulder, but she flinched away. The ring on her finger felt heavy, a shackle rather than protection. Every wall, every guard, every security measure suddenly seemed aimed at containing her rather than defending her. She forced herself through the motions of the day. Security briefings, medical inventory, the quiet dinner where Carlo watched her with concern while she pushed food around her plate. The weight of eyes followed her everywhere. Suspicious guards, worried staff, Carlo's protective gaze that now felt like another form of custody. After dinner, alone in her room, Maeve stared at the ring. It caught the light like a promise, but promises could be cages. With sudden, crystal clarity, she knew she couldn't live like this. A doubted wife, a political liability, a target making everyone around her vulnerable. She twisted the ring off, placed it on the nightstand. The indent it left felt like freedom. Moving with deliberate calm, she packed a small backpack. First aid supplies, energy bars, a flashlight, spare clothes, basic survival gear that wouldn't slow her down. Her EMT training helped her prioritize what she absolutely needed versus what she could find or improvise. The service exit had the lightest security she'd noted that weeks ago. Between shift changes, there was a 3-minute window with minimal coverage. She'd counted cameras, memorized blind spots, mapped the route in her head until she could walk it in her sleep. Maeve waited until the house settled into its nighttime rhythm. Guards made their rounds, staff retired to their quarters, and Carlo sequestered himself in his study with Bianca, analyzing the deepfake source. No one noticed her slipping through shadows she'd studied for weeks. The service exit opened silently. She'd oiled the hinges during a cleaning session days ago. Cool night air kissed her face as she stepped into darkness. Muscle memory guiding her past motion sensors she'd observed and timed. The woods beckoned, familiar and dangerous. These same trees had witnessed her first taste of this war, tied to rough bark, fighting to stay conscious. Now, they would see her choose her own path, her own battle. She moved with purpose, EMT instincts mapping terrain and noting landmarks. Each step took her deeper into the forest where it all began. Not running away, but moving toward something. A plan forming from rage and determination, built on everything she'd learned about Valentine's methods. The night wrapped around her like a cloak as she traversed the shadowed landscape. She recognized certain trees, certain rock formations. The cedar where they'd left her stood like a dark sentinel, its bark still bearing traces of rope fiber. Midnight approached as Maeve pushed further into the woods, her breath fogging in the cold air. She wasn't just surviving now, she was hunting. Every wilderness rescue, every emergency response, every lesson in tracking and terrain reading sharpened into weapons in her mind. The same skills that helped her save lives could help her end this nightmare. She knew these woods, knew how to use them. Valentine might be a master of urban warfare and digital deception, but here, among the trees and shadows, she had the advantage. Each step felt like reclaiming something stolen: her freedom, her agency, her right to choose the terms of her own survival. The backpack settled comfortably between her shoulders, medical supplies ready to either heal or harm. She'd learned enough about violence in Carlo's world to know that sometimes safety required both. The forest grew denser, darker, but Maeve moved with increasing confidence. She wasn't the same woman they'd tied to a tree and left to die. She wasn't running from the nightmare anymore. She was choosing the battleground where it would end. Shadows played through branches overhead as clouds crossed the moon. The same darkness that had terrified her weeks ago now felt like an ally, hiding her movement as she pushed deeper into the wilderness. Her fury burned steady and cold, a compass pointing toward resolution. Frost-glazed grass crunched under Maeve's boots as she moved through the cedar grove. The eastern sky remained ink-dark, stars fading as false dawn approached. Her breath clouded in rhythmic puffs while she worked, fingers steady despite the cold. The cedar's rough bark felt familiar against her palms as she positioned herself exactly where they'd left her weeks ago. This time she controlled the ropes. The rescue knot was her choice, a quick release she could activate with one sharp tug. She'd practiced it hundreds of times in wilderness training, teaching others how to escape in emergencies. Emergency beacons glowed faintly through the underbrush, where she'd placed them in a careful triangle. Their infrared signals would guide Carlo's team when needed, but remain invisible to Valentine's men. The flare gun rested across her thighs, loaded and ready. Her phone screen cast blue light across her face as she typed the message that would draw Valentine in. A simple location ping, the kind of electronic breadcrumb his surveillance would catch. Her thumb hovered over send for just a moment before pressing down. No turning back now. The wedding band sat heavy in her jacket pocket, a constant reminder of what she'd left behind. She'd removed it in anger, but kept it close, some part of her unable to fully let go of what it represented. She didn't know Carlo had embedded a passive tracker in it, designed not to cage her but to find her if the worst happened. Minutes stretched like cold molasses. Maeve regulated her breathing, using the rescue breathing counts she taught in EMT training. 4 counts in, hold for 7, 8 counts out. The routine kept panic at bay as headlights swept through trees in the distance. Valentine arrived with characteristic theatricality. 3 black SUVs, teams of men fanning out with practiced efficiency. He emerged last, elegant in a tailored coat, phone already raised to capture his moment of triumph. His smile carried all the warmth of a shark's. "The little tree girl, come home to roost to her giliti," he called out, voice carrying across the clearing. How poetic! Carlo's bride offering herself up so beautifully. Maeve kept her expression neutral, hands steady on the flare gun. She watched his men move into position, counting weapons, noting angles. Everything she'd learned about tactical assessment in Carlo's compound crystallized into sharp focus. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice such an obvious trap?" Valentine continued, circling closer. "Though I admit, I expected Carlo's men, not his runaway wife alone in the woods." Movement flickered in the shadows behind him. Silent, deadly shapes taking position. Carlo's team, following the infrared trail she'd laid. Her heart lurched at the sight of Carlo himself, moving like a predator through the darkness, every line of him promising violence. Valentine raised his phone higher, framing the shot. "Smile for the camera, dear. Let's show your husband what betrayal looks like." The clearing erupted into chaos. Maeve yanked the rescue knot free as Carlo's men burst from cover. She brought the flare gun up in one fluid motion, muscle memory from countless wilderness drills taking over. The magnesium burst painted everything in harsh red light, temporary blindness stealing Valentine's gunman's aim. She rolled behind a fallen log as bullets sparked against bark. The cedar's trunk shuddered with impacts. Gunfire created a deadly crosshatch of trajectories above her head. Through the chaos, she glimpsed Enzo breaking free from his handlers, trying to use the firefight as cover for escape. Bianca's silhouette appeared at the tree line, elegant even in tactical gear. Her shot dropped Enzo with surgical precision. No killing blow, but he wouldn't run again. Carlo moved through the battle like a force of nature, each motion exact and lethal. He'd positioned himself between Maeve and the heaviest fire, though she noticed he left her room to move, to fight, to choose. Even now, he protected without. Caging. Valentine stumbled back from the flare's afterimage, his composure cracking. The phone clattered from his hand as he blinked desperately, reaching for a weapon. His men fell back under the precision of Carlo's assault team, leaving their leader increasingly exposed. Maeve reloaded the flare gun with practiced efficiency, the motion as natural as any emergency response. The sulfur glow painted everything in shades of blood and shadow. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but her hands remained steady. She and Carlo ended up back to back, moving in unconscious synchronization. His breathing came hard and fast, matching her own. The gun in his hands never wavered from Valentine's position. The battle balanced on a razor's edge. Valentine half-blinded but dangerous, Carlo's team holding position, Maeve with one more flare ready to launch. The pre-dawn air hung thick with cordite and tension. Here in this grove, where everything began, where she'd first been pulled into their war, Maeve felt the weight of choice. She wasn't a helpless victim anymore, nor a protected wife. She was a fighter who'd chosen her ground, set her trap, and now stood ready to end what Valentine had started. The cedar's branches creaked overhead, dawn's first pale light beginning to filter through. The emergency beacons pulsed their steady rhythm into the shadows. Frost continued forming on the grass, nature indifferent to the human drama playing out in this small clearing. Carlo's presence at her back radiated heat and lethal focus. The wedding band in her pocket seemed to pulse in time with her racing heart. The flare gun's grip fit perfectly in her palm as she sighted down its barrel, sulfur smoke curling through the air between her and her target. The gunshot cracked through the grove like thunder. Valentine's body jerked, then crumpled. Carlo's aim had been perfect. One clean shot, no dramatic last words or final gambits, just the abrupt end of a man who'd built his power on theater and fear. Carlo's voice cut through the ringing silence, sharp and cold. "Secure the perimeter. I want his properties locked down within the hour. Every route, every safe house, every shell company. Strip it all." His men moved with mechanical precision, already coordinating through encrypted channels to cauterize Valentine's bleeding empire. Maeve lowered the flare gun slowly, watching Carlo direct the operation with ruthless efficiency. Teams deployed across the city, hitting predetermined targets with synchronized precision. Account numbers were frozen, evidence collected, loyalists rounded up. It was like watching a surgeon excise cancer, clinical, thorough, and completely devoid of mercy. By mid-morning, the grove had been sanitized, all traces of the confrontation erased. The cedar stood sentinel over empty ground, frost melting in the strengthening sun. Maeve rode back to the estate in silence, the wedding band still heavy in her pocket, Carlo's presence beside her carrying the weight of unspoken words. The afternoon brought a different kind of reckoning. Carlo gathered his inner circle in the main study, capos, lieutenants, and key advisors, standing in rigid attention as Salvatore was brought in under guard. The old man's face was ashen, but he held his head high. "Your actions endangered this family," Carlo stated, voice carrying to every corner. "You hid vital intelligence. Your choices rippled out to hurt an innocent." His eyes flicked to Maeve. Traditional punishment would be death. Salvatore didn't flinch. He'd survived enough wars to face his end with dignity. "However," Carlo continued, "at Maeve's request, you will live. But you leave with nothing, no contacts, no resources, no protection. Exile, complete and permanent." The message was clear to everyone watching. Mercy had limits and loyalty meant transparency. After the others filed out, Maeve remained. The study felt smaller somehow, more intimate, as she finally voiced what had simmered since discovering the tracker. "You put a beacon in my ring." Not a question. "You let rumors spread about my loyalty instead of shutting them down. More half-truths, more control disguised as protection." Her voice stayed steady despite the hurt beneath the words. Carlo moved to his desk, opened a drawer, and laid out several items. A thick envelope of documents, a set of keys, and a banker's folder. Divorce papers, already signed, an apartment in Montreal, fully furnished and secure, accounts in your name only, enough to start fresh anywhere. He met her gaze directly. "I won't follow. You'll never see me again if that's what you choose." The offer hung between them. Absolute freedom, proven through his willingness to let her go. It was the most honest declaration of love he could make. Maeve picked up the papers, studied them, then deliberately set them aside. "I'm staying," she said quietly. "But we rewrite the rules. Together. Completely transparent." Over the next hours, they drafted a new contract. Bianca joined them, adding legal framework to Maeve's conditions. Every term was debated, clarified, and carefully worded. Maeve would have final say over her own security protocols, working directly with Bianca as an equal partner. She would launch a foundation under her name, channeling resources into wilderness medical training and safe house programs for those who needed escape routes. "The tracking ends," Maeve insisted. "I choose to stay. That has to be enough." Carlo nodded, a muscle working in his jaw. "I choose to trust," he replied, the words clearly unfamiliar but sincere. Bianca added provisions for joint decision-making on major operations, creating a framework where Maeve's medical expertise and tactical insight would be valued, not just tolerated. The document grew into something new, not just a marriage contract, but a blueprint for partnership. Outside, the city grew quiet as word spread of Valentine's fall. Streets emptied early, businesses closed their shutters, people hurried home. It was the silence of a population holding its breath, waiting to see what new order would emerge from the chaos. As twilight painted the study in shades of purple and gold, Maeve and Carlo sat at his desk for the final signatures. The rings lay between them, symbols of possession transformed into tokens of choice. "You understand what you're choosing?" Carlo asked softly. "This life will never be simple." Maeve picked up her ring, studying how it caught the fading light. "I'm choosing complexity with honesty over simplicity built on control." She slipped it back on her finger, the weight familiar now. "I'm choosing us, on terms we build together." Carlo's signature was bold and decisive on the last page. When he reached for his own ring, his hands were steady. The metal gleamed as he put it on, a conscious acceptance of the new boundaries they'd drawn. Bianca witnessed the signatures with a slight smile, then gathered the papers for filing. The click of her heels faded down the hallway, leaving them alone in the growing darkness. Through the windows, the city lights began to flicker on one by one, like stars emerging after a storm. The silence felt different now. Not the hush of fear, but the quiet of exhausted peace. The siege was over, not just the physical war, but the deeper battle of trust versus control, of love versus power. They sat together in the deepening twilight. No words needed. The contract lay signed between them, ink drying on pages that would reshape both their lives. Outside their walls, the city began to breathe again, tentatively testing the edges of its new reality. Sunrise painted the mountain slopes in watercolor shades of amber and rose, the early spring air still carrying winter's bite. 3 weeks had passed like water through careful fingers, each day marking small victories in their new normal. The Foundation's first shipments of wilderness medkits had gone out 2 days ago, distributed to remote clinics and rescue outposts across the region. Each kit bore Maeve's carefully chosen supplies, quick clot gauze, emergency splints, and detailed protocol cards written in her precise hand. At the estate, the changes were subtle but significant. Gone were the heavy locks that only opened from outside. New mechanisms gave occupants control over their spaces. Security cameras still swept the grounds, but internal monitoring had been reduced to public areas only. The patrol rotations had lightened, finding balance between vigilance and trust. Maeve's boots crunched over frost-tipped grass as she and Carlo followed the familiar trail to the cedar grove. The morning mist rose in lazy spirals around their ankles, nature's own smokescreen slowly burning off in the strengthening light. She watched Carlo carry 2 young saplings, their root balls carefully wrapped in burlap, his movements measured and purposeful. The old cedar still stood sentinel, its bark bearing faint marks where rope had once bit deep. But today those scars felt more like testament than tragedy. Proof that wounds could heal, that pain could transform into purpose. Carlo set the saplings down and began digging, his jacket draped over a nearby branch. The mechanical action of shovel-breaking earth carried its own kind of meditation. Maeve settled on a fallen log, drawing slow breaths of pine-scented air as she watched him work. The steam of their exhales mingled in the cool morning light. "Here?" he asked, pausing between the holes he'd prepared. His voice was soft, private, meant only for her. Maeve nodded, rising to help position the first sapling. Together they settled its roots into the earth, Carlo's hands steady as they packed soil around the delicate system that would anchor new growth. The second tree went in with the same care, creating a natural triangle with the old cedar. Standing back, Carlo brushed dirt from his palms and turned to face her. The moment held its own gravity, as if the very air had still to listen. When he spoke, his words were unscripted, but carried the weight of absolute truth. "I choose you," he said simply. "Not as something to possess or control, but as someone to protect through partnership. I promise to honor your agency, to meet each day with transparency, and to build a future where safety comes from trust, not fear." Maeve stepped closer, taking his soil-dusted hands in hers. "I choose you," she echoed. "Not as shelter from storms, but as someone to weather them with. I promise to meet your protection with honesty, to build bridges where others see walls, and to remember that love thrives in freedom, not constraint." The morning light caught the simple bands on their fingers, metal warming in the strengthening sun. No witnesses were needed for these vows, the trees would hold their words, roots growing deep as testament to what could bloom from darkness. They hiked back toward the trailhead, hand in hand, their conversation turning to everyday matters with comfortable ease. Maeve detailed her plans for the evening's sauce, a recipe she'd been perfecting. Carlo suggested picking up fresh bread from the Italian bakery that had recently reopened. "Did you see Bianca's message about the first aid course?" Maeve asked as they crossed a small wooden bridge, their footsteps hollow on the planks. Overbooked within hours. Pride colored his voice, not for himself, but for her vision taking shape. "We'll need a bigger venue for the next one." Back at the estate, the day settled into its rhythm. The kitchen filled with afternoon light as Maeve chopped herbs and Carlo reviewed reports at the island, their domestic peace punctuated by the quiet clicking of his laptop keys and the steady rhythm of her knife on the cutting board. When her phone buzzed with another update from Bianca about the foundation's progress, Maeve smiled and reached for her ring. With deliberate movements, she toggled off the beacon, not because she needed to hide, but because she could. The simple act represented everything they'd built. Safety as choice rather than cage, protection freely accepted rather than imposed. Carlo looked up at the soft click, understanding passing between them without words. He rose from his seat, moving behind her to press a kiss to her shoulder as she stirred the simmering sauce. The gesture carried no possession, only appreciation. The city beyond their windows began its evening transformation. Lights blinking on in office buildings and apartments like stars emerging in an urban sky. Inside, they moved through the familiar dance of setting their table. Plates aligned, wine poured, napkins folded with careful precision. Laughter drifted through the kitchen, warm and genuine, as Maeve recounted a story from her morning foundation meeting. The sound softened the sharp edges of their world, transformed their space into something that felt remarkably like home. Outside these walls, Carlo's name might still command fear, his reputation a dark legacy earned through necessary violence. But here, in this kitchen with this woman, his touch remained gentle, his voice soft, his love expressed through 1,000 small choices that prioritized her freedom. The sauce bubbled on the stove, filling the air with the scent of herbs and promise. 2 place settings waited on the island, simple ceramic plates that had replaced the formal china. Every detail spoke of their new normal, a life built on choice rather than coercion, on partnership rather than power.